Hi, my name is Scott Lamlein. I'm Director of Music at St. John's, and I welcome you to our virtual tour of the Austin organ at St. John's Episcopal Church that is often featured in concerts, and we're so glad you've joined us today. Today is my special guest. I have Ralph Valentine, who is our organist and choir master emeritus. And he'll tell you when he served at St. John's, because of course those dates are out of my head right now at the moment. But I can't help but mention that we're recording this on his patron saint day, Valentine's Day, and so I'm honored to talk with Ralph Valentine on Valentine's Day. So Ralph, I hope you'll tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are now, and a little bit about the challenges of the organ at St. John's before the current organ was installed in 1995.
Well, thank you, Scott. Pleasure to be with you. And if you think you have trouble remembering dates, just imagine me. I know I came in 1976 and I was there for 34 years. So I guess 2010 is when I left. When I first came to St. John's, to say that playing the organ and directing the choir was challenging is a definite understatement, because the console, believe it or not, was in a different room from where the choir sat and where the organ was. It was in the sacristy, because they didn't really feel that there was room for the console in the chancel, and they stuck it in there. And so for me to communicate with the choir, we had a set of mirrors to begin with, and later on I went out and purchased a closed circuit TV, so that when we had the luxury of a separate organist and choir master, we would be able to communicate with one another much better. So we had the console in a separate room, which meant that I only heard the singers that were right next to me. And as far as the organ balance, that was a disaster. You had no idea what the balance was between the choir and the organ. Part of my job was taking care of the organ, which meant tuning it. And believe me, it needed tuning every single week, because the layout of the organ was abysmal. It really was. All the divisions were on different levels and in different locations. And we'll start with the swell organ, which was over my head. That was in the financial bookkeeper's office. And she loved to crank up the heat, and she had it at 80 degrees in there. So we had the swell at 80 degrees. Then across the way, the grate was half a level lower, and that was at a totally different temperature. And then the poor choir organ was below and behind the grate, right against the stone wall, the exterior wall of the church, and there was no heat source of any kind. So you had the choir at 50 degrees, the grate at 60, and the swell at 80. And of course, it changed with the seasons. And then when we put the antiphonal organ in, we had 4 divisions that were at different temperatures all the time.
I've seen some pictures of the tonal egress, the way that the grate division and the choir division were able to get out into the room, and it looks like it was basically going through a little tiny window instead of an open space.
You're absolutely right. There was a gigantic stone arch over on that side. The interesting thing was the engineers said it had no structural purpose whatsoever, but it was there, and it literally blocked 90% of the sound of the grate and 98% of the choir.
And the choir had to speak through the pedal division and then that, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Wind pressures were very high. It was a showpiece organ for Austin back in the days, 1950, because it was the premier work, I believe, of their new tonal director, Richard Piper, came from England. And boy, it had so many problems associated with the layout.
And so was that organ designed by Clarence Waters, who was at St. John's for so many years?
No, I believe that was right Clarence came to St. John's 2 times. He left one time for reasons that I've forgotten. And I think when he came back, that 1950s organ had already been put in. So I don't believe he had anything to do with it.
Got it. Okay.
It was funded by the family, by the way, who all went to church there.
The Austin family.
Correct.
Yeah, I've read that. That's intriguing. Fast forward a little bit to 1992, tragic day in October of 1992 that the church had an awful fire. And what did you find?
Well, I got a call from the senior warden about 1 a.m. in the morning saying that it was an 8-alarm fire, I believe. And when I came up there the next morning, we had a service outside, and one of the firemen took me in afterwards, and there was a huge amount of water in there, so we waded in. And one of the interesting things the fireman told me, he said, now look at the antiphonal organ in the back there. You can see how hot it is because all the pipes have melted. And he was pointing at the trumpet en chamade. And of course, that was always in a horizontal position. It had not buckled and melted. But the smaller principal pipes back there certainly had all melted. And they were vertical. I remember going up into the Swell Division and looking out at the sky. The ceiling had collapsed on that. The beautiful casework on the right had been badly charred. The fire actually ignited the bottom 12 notes of the 16-foot open wood in the pedal and burned probably a quarter of the pipes, of the length of the pipes before the firemen were able to get it out. They had to smash a lot of windows to get the water in, and their hoses. So it was a real mess, and I was kind of in shock for a week after that.
I'm sure that was a horrible thing to witness, and so many years that you spent making music at that instrument, despite its flaws, it was your baby, and
right.
Yeah. And as I've said, so the church is in insurance land, and many people were very interested in being sure that the church arose like a phoenix out of the ashes into something even better. And so you had the opportunity to help to design a real showpiece organ.
We had the luxury of not only having the normal insurance at the church, but also diocesan insurance on top of that. And of course, we wanted to do it right the second time around. And having lived with the old instrument and knowing what the problems were, I had an idea of how we were going to design it. And the most critical thing was to have all the divisions on the same level and at the same temperature. And I think we were pretty successful in doing that. Luckily, we were able to eliminate the financial secretary's office. And so we were able to move the choir over alongside the swell on that side. You know, of course, it's called positive now, but they're both on the same level and the same temperature, and that works out well. And then we were able to get rid of that gigantic stone arch in the grate and replace it with a very thin beam. So the grate was able to speak out freely, finally, and the pedal as well. And we were able to get the console out in the chancel on wheels so it could move around, and that gave us an enormous amount of flexibility that we had never had before. And I was in heaven because I could actually hear the choir and the organ for the first time when it was done.
What a gift. And about a third, maybe a little bit more of the old organ was able to be used. Am I remembering that right?
38%.
Yeah.
Old pipe work that was repurposed.
Mhm. Mhm. That's great. So I'm gonna roll our little video here. A special thanks to Michelle Horsley, who's the current chair of the American Guild of Organists in Hartford and music director at Trinity Church on Sigourney Street, for coming to take this great video. And so we'll just sort of talk our way through it here. This front window is one of the many that had to be broken as part of the fire suppression, if I recall the stories.
Correct. And then it was, all the pieces were collected and it was magically refabricated by a wonderful firm. I forget where they're located.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of the magic of the woodwork in the cases is just incredible to me. So Charles Nazarian of the Fisk Organ Company was responsible, if I recall, for the design, and the main case on the left side of the chancel. This one here has this amazing blending of old and new that you can barely tell the difference of unless you're really looking hard. I think it's and the other cases match like they've always been there, I think, Ralph.
The astonishing difference is the fact that we had these wonderful polished pipes that Austin made a special effort to give us. They came from another company, if I remember correctly, or at least they were sent out to be highly polished. In the old case, we had rather Victorian looking gilded pipes, and they were all dummies. These now all are speaking pipes on all of the cases, bottom octaves of various stops like the flute harmonique and the violon, and some pedal stops as well.
Yeah.
But indeed, a large part of the case you're looking at was destroyed by fire, and they did a fabulous job making it, as Scott said, look like it had always been there.
Yeah. And so the console there and its home in the chancel, we're all set up for COVID here. I should have cleaned, I said to Ralph earlier before we did this, but it's in a perfect location for hearing the organ and choir. And I'm going to just pause for just a second.
When we talk about being able to finally hear the organ, there was one little problem, and that was I could hear the pedal particularly well because the grill was still there, and behind the grill was the pedal organ, including the gigantic speaker that produces the 32-foot tones. So I wound up putting some plywood sheets in there that were all that I had available at the time, and they were sort of jury rigged and put in with simple hardware. But Scott, I think you've done something more permanent and a little bit better now.
Yeah, in fact, I think Peter, my predecessor, started the process of completely sealing off that grill, which you see off beyond the console here, with felted and with compression screws, so it is completely sealed off from the rest of the room, and it presented an immediate problem with not only the tuning, but the inability for the pedal division to get out. So we added some grill work in the transept, so the sound now goes out that way.
It was a brilliant idea.
It's quite nice.
We thought the wheels on the console would be a great idea, and indeed we had lots of recitals and would always move the console out. Unfortunately, we found out that the tile in the chancel was very fragile, and as we started to roll around many times, some of it began to crumble, and so we had to get some panels to lay over the tile. I'm not sure that you do that anymore, do you? Or
no, I think not long before I came, Peter and a couple of other people replaced the wheels with rubber wheels.
Excellent.
And so it moves extremely, in fact, a little too easily now. if it's in just the right position and you're really getting into playing, it can roll away.
Right.
So the swell division shows us the swell shades in the background that speak out into the chancel on the right-hand side as you're looking up toward the back. And do you recognize any pipes here from the old organ, or is it that was a curiosity for me?
You see the roar flute there. The bottom 12 are old, and the bottom of that principal is old, and the reeds are all from the former organ as well, including the 16-foot fagotto that used to be in the choir is an 8-foot oboe.
Ah, yeah. So the lower 12 got added?
No, yes, that's correct.
So this is the Vox Humana in its own enclosure, which is a neat thing in that you can, there are the little tiny pipes. The little wooden doors can be closed to make it even more remote sounding.
And I believe that the tremolo can be operated independently of the regular tremolo, which enables you to have kind of a regal stop.
Yes, it's true. Here's the swell shades moving, which allow the sound to get out into the chancel or not, and that allows us to make crescendos happen. The organ is always its own same volume when you're inside, and those big doors are controlled by our feet to make the volume change. Now we're going to have a little tour of the organ chamber, the wind chest, the universal air chest. And so that hatchway is a scary looking place, but we go inside there to make adjustments to the action if things go wrong, and you can seal yourself in there while the organ is playing and make changes. This is the tremolo, which shakes the air and makes a vibrato effect. You can hear it going. That is the key action. One of those traces is connected to a valve, and if the stop is on and the key is on, the air goes out the pipe. So now we're on to the positive division, which is in the forward chamber on the right side of the chancel. And this is the big honk. One of my favorite reeds, Ralph.
And it's on a separate chest so that the pressure can be considerably more than the rest of the division. Do you remember what it's on, Scott?
I think it's 15 inches.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, so that makes a loud sound, and then there's some older and new pipes there. Kind of on the left, it's hard to see here, I've stopped it for a second, but on the left toward the top is the crumhorn, which if I recall came from the old organ. It actually looks old. It's one of the few ranks of pipes in the organ that show its age.
That actually was a 16-foot on the swell before.
And clarinet, right? We just called it a clarinet, and since the whole organ went French in its new iteration, it took on the crumhorn. So here's more of the casework. You can sort of see how only the lower part of that transept case is actually an opening. There's a little tiny arch where the sound gets out, and that's about it. But it's a really beautiful case. My junk pile was not supposed to get into this, but this is the pedal division. If you want to give us a little tour here, Ralph.
Well, as you can tell on the bottom left, those are old pipes. We're talking about the open wood here and the Borden, and you can see the bottom 12 notes of the open wood going up at an angle along the ceiling line. And that's those are the 12 pipes that had fire in the upper parts. I'm not sure we're going to be able to see that.
I think a little later on, we'll get to see how they got grafted together. New parts and old parts.
Those three big pipes are the 16-foot violon, part of that rank. And most of what you see in the upper work of the pedal is new, because in the old organ, there are only two ranks in the pedal, the bombard and the open wood.
Wow. Not much to work with there. Here's a nice view of the nave through that transept case. And then I'll look down at, oh, it's me. So we're heading up to those the top part of those open wood pipes and the great division.
You can see the line where the new tops were grafted on, as Scott was saying.
Kind of a sea of pipes look there. I got to look at the drawings, and the neat thing is that the great chest got to be pushed so much farther forward, it's almost actually in the room.
More violone pipes.
And there's the top of that open wood.
And I think you might have seen a speaker on the right-hand side for the MIDI. Small speaker.
Some of our electronic voices have one giant speaker and several little ones. Here's a view down into the resonators of the 16-foot bombard, and that big box on the back is the speaker for the low notes of the MIDI stops, the electronic voices. So we're going to take a little plane ride back to the Antiphonal Division here. And the Antiphonal Division was added to the old organ in the 70s and then rebuilt again after the fire. And it's a neat division. It really speaks very presently into the nave and with some clarity. It's on a lower pressure, and that reed is commanding, but not ear splitting as it looks. So you were involved obviously in the original installation of an antiphonal division back here, right, Ralph?
Correct. And I think
let me, before you get to that, let me mention the windows. The first time I came to St. John's was for the dedication of this organ, and I remember coming into the narthex and buying my ticket and looking up and thinking, oh, this church has their priorities right.
The one change we made after the fire was the location of the blower. The blower used to be in the narthex.
Oh.
And so, as I was saying earlier, every division was on a different temperature, and for the blower to be sucking in air from a cold narthex just made things all the worse. So we put in a wind line that connects to the main blower now. So all the air going into the organ is the same temperature. The original, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but the original antiphonal organ, I got a lot of complaints that the trumpet en chamade was too loud. And so when the new one was put in, the wind pressure was reduced by 1 inch. And now I don't feel it's quite what it should be, but people are happier, I guess.
Always a compromise, right?
Right.
So the remainder of this has some sort of general photos of the chancel and the overall picture. So do you have any impressions of the organ itself that you remember, any stories of playing it for particular events that were moving or what have you?
Well, somehow this video surfaced of our 150th anniversary, which was the old organ plus the new antiphonal. And I remember having this huge choir and brass. I don't know how we fit them all in, but it was quite something. And to see that video recently, after all these years, was quite something. But the console, of course, was in the sacristy. We did have the closed circuit television by that point. So when I was conducting and we had an organist, things held together much better than they usually do.
Yeah, in fact, this video I think will show at some moment where we have since your time, Ralph, we've added mirrors to that seating carol where it had been the opening where the you would, where the console would be visible through, barely visible through the lattice work. And it's just amazing to imagine that that's your only communication with the choir is through that little opening. And so here it is. This is the spot there.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I would imagine that you had to yell quite a bit,
That's why
not just to get the choir's attention, but to get your voice through that area, through.
That's why I have no voice left at my age.
And these cases were completely a new design. The two organ cases on the two twin organ cases on the right side as you face, where the Swell Division and the Positive are, and they just match so nicely the rest of the room and the other case.
You can't believe how dirty the old gilded case pipes were, and it just drove me crazy. And finally, I asked my wife if she would be willing to help me repaint all the gold pipes, and we hauled them all out and took them to the basement and spray painted them, put them all back, thought what a wonderful job we had done. And a day later, one on the side of the swell fell with a huge crash.
Oh, no.
We had not quite hooked that one up correctly, so had to take that down to Austin and have it rebuilt.
Fortunately, it wasn't a speaking pipe, right? It just had to be cosmetically fixed.
Exactly. And fortunately, the choir wasn't sitting under it.
Right. More importantly, yeah. Well, it is certainly a stunning room. And, we forget, we have people come visit and they just ooh and ah when they walk into the space. And it's a nice thing to hear that, because, when we're in it all the time, we sort of get used to it and forget how really, truly beautiful it is. And what a gift that through the horrible fire in the early 90s, we were able to make happen this amazing instrument and room. So it's a gift to the community. And
well, you have done wonders there with the Music at the Red Doors series, and featuring this instrument played by so many different people has just been absolutely wonderful for me to be in Denver and feel like I'm back home again, and watch as much as I can.
Yeah, the gift of live streaming. We've had both that, and our choir has enjoyed the occasional evensong from your place as well. Hey, Ralph is doing an evensong. Let's all watch. The world has gotten smaller because of live streaming, and so that's a very nice thing. So thanks. I really appreciate the time, Ralph, and this interview today. And so this is Ralph Valentine here, and I'm Scott Lamlein. So thanks you all for watching our virtual tour.